So let me share my take on how and why this paragraph fulfills the requirements of the rubric so well. So first of all, in terms of a claim, we have a sentence that clearly links a specific concept from Greenblatt or any theory article to a specific idea from Morrison. So we don't have a general statement like Stephen Greenblatt's ideas about culture. We have a specific idea. That's really important because the more specific the idea, the better the paragraph. I know that sounds paradoxical. A lot of times we think we can write more when we're vague, but it's the opposite. The more narrow, the more developed the ideas will be later. So that's an outstanding claim. Then the next thing, remember, that's supposed to happen is the three-part uh, theory-based analysis. And the first part of that is to explain the idea from the theory. Take two or three sentences and walk us through what exactly does the theory mean before you start applying it to Sula. This is valuable for two reasons. One, it makes sure that you understand what the theory means, and two, it makes sure that your readers understand what the theory is before you move to applying it. Very often, students move to applying the theory when they don't have a full understanding themselves or confusing their readers because they haven't fully explained the theory before they apply it. Again, I think this paragraph does a very good job with that. It's got a couple sentences that walk us through what it means using very short quotes from the theory integrated into the author's own paraphrases, the author's own words. I like it. What else could be done? Well, one technique to think about when you're talking about theory is to provide an example of what you're talking about in the theory in our contemporary life, an example outside of Sula, so that the reader can sort of see what does this mean in our life today, so that when you go to apply the idea to Sula, the reader's already seen you make that move. Here's the idea, here's where we see it in our culture today. Now, let's apply it to Sula. That's kind of the logic. Again, I think this piece does a nice job. One of the things that's really important that this paragraph does is it transitions clearly from I'm explaining Greenblatt to I'm applying Greenblatt to Sula. And the way it does that is just a really simple phrase in regards to Sula, or if we apply this to Sula, or in the case of Sula, this idea, right? Language that says, reader, I am moving now from explaining Greenblatt to applying Greenblatt to Sula. That kind of transitional work is very important. So this is a good example of that. And then you'll notice in the sentences that follow, this writer, and it's Elizabeth's paper, really does a beautiful job of mixing in short quotes from Greenblatt as she talks about how this idea of constraint applies to Sula. It's very good. So here we can see what I was talking about with source integration. There's no big plop from either Greenblatt or Sula in this paragraph. Just small chunks, small phrases worked into sentences that interpret them. Now, if Elizabeth had stopped here and just had quotes from Greenblatt, that wouldn't have worked. But what happens is in the sentences that follow, Elizabeth does a very nice job of bringing in short quotes from Sula. And this is the number one thing I've seen missing from the theory-based paragraph drafts I've seen so far. The taking the theory back to the language from Sula. Now, we don't have to look at this language like we do in the other paragraphs. In the literary device-based paragraphs, we need to unpack how the literary devices work, what they mean, and how they comment on agency. That's not what we're doing when we quote language from Sula here. In this case, what we're doing with the language is saying, how does the specific language from Sula manifest this idea from theory? How do we see this idea from theory in specific words from Sula? So it's not enough to just generalize about what's happening in Sula, not enough to just generalize about the passage you've discussed. You want to get in there and break down and talk about specific words and how the theory applies. Now, one last thing that is done very nicely in this paragraph is the final sentence, where she brings us back to the big idea that the sentence started with and puts the discussion in the larger context of what Morrison is trying to say about agency and the writer's chosen theme, in this case, femininity. So all around, this is an excellent paragraph. This is an A-level paragraph, even though I suggested one way that it could be further developed in terms of the explanation of the theory, right? If you recall, I suggested you could give us a little bit more of an explanation of theory by sharing a contemporary example as a way of helping the reader understand. Okay, so that's my take on Elizabeth's paragraph. Now, I want you to repeat the same exercise we just completed with Elizabeth's paragraph with a second sample paragraph. You'll see in our Google Doc that I have included another paragraph from someone else's theory-based analysis paragraphs. And this is another paragraph that fundamentally has some really good ideas, but does not meet one or more of the criteria. And what I'd like you to do in a 1 to 2 minute video response is the same thing we just did. I'd like you to walk through each of these 3 criteria and ask yourself, how well does this sample paragraph meet that criteria? Or what could be done in this sample paragraph to better meet that criteria? So you're moving back and forth, you're looking at each criteria, the claim, I think it works because, theory, the theory-based interpretation, I see all 3 elements, or I see only 2 of the elements, or I think it needs to be reworked for this reason, and then source integration. How well is the writer integrating brief quotes into the paragraph rather than plopping larger quotes and then trying to explain them later? So again, looking at these 3 criteria with this paragraph, presenting your findings in a 1 to 2 minute video that you post as a reply to the post that my video lecture is in. Okay? All right, good. See you in the discussion, and afterwards you'll find another video as we walk through this makeup activity for synchronous session number 2.